Well, welcome to another episode of the MTG Dudes, where we're going to talk about red creatures today. They are really full of really fun and exciting creatures between dragons, goblins, and just elementals, and just anything else you can think of. Gremlins. The movie Gremlins. Anyway, there's just so many creatures to choose from.
Yeah, red creatures are a lot of fun because most of them are pretty big and can do a lot of awful things.
So we're gonna jump right into it. We'll start with some honorable mentions, and the first one I have is Lathliss Dragon Queen. I have her as I have a dragon deck, and I have her as an honorable mention because obviously I'm not going to use her in a lot of decks. But when you're in a dragon type deck where you got at least throw a couple dragons in, she's 4 and 2 red, a legendary creature, so she can be commander, and she's flying. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. You can also pay a white and a red. Dragons you control get +1/+0 to end of turn. And then she's also a 6/6. So not only is she giving you bodies every time you throw non-token dragons, but she can also make your stuff a little bit bigger, or bigger, or bigger, depending how much open mana you have when you attack.
Always a good play. If you're going to use a dragon tribal deck, this is definitely one you want to have in there.
I would love to put her on a more any kind of drag or any kind of deck, but again, she's a little more creature centric when you play her. So that's my honorable mention.
My honorable mention is the Young Pyromancer. One colorless, one red, so easy to get on the field. 2/1. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 red elemental creature token. Red has a lot of cantrips that you can throw into the deck, whether it's burning things or destroying artifacts, land destruction. Plenty of choices you have, and if you're going to do that, the Young Pyromancer is a good add.
And to add on to that, I also have another honorable mention. I knew I threw it on there and I couldn't figure out why, and now I remember why. It goes along with your honorable mention very well, but Gutter Snipe is kind of a very similar thing. Red is really well known for the red spells, instant sorceries. I mean, it has a lot of burn, and Gutter Snipe is another one that works really well with the Young Pyromancer. I've put them both in decks, and that's mostly a burn deck. And the reason being because Gutter Snipe is 2 and a red. It's a 2/2, and whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. So not only can you throw in Young Pyromancer and get creatures, but why not throw Gutter Snipe and do some damage in the process?
I agree with that assessment. These probably aren't going to go into every deck that plays red, but if you're going to be a spell slinger, as it were, or even just moderate with your instant and sorceries, these are definitely guys worth having in your deck.
It's a really fun combo, and I know you built a burn deck, and it kind of gave me inspiration for a 60 card arena deck that I did about a year and a half ago, and I kind of used it in a F&M a couple times too, where it was mostly burn, but then I had Gutter Snipes, and I played 4 of those, and I played 4 Young Pyromancers, and that deck, they they try to counter my spells, but when it came to my creatures, because of the fact I was casting them, I was still getting effects. So the spells itself weren't doing anything, but I was still getting effects, and they couldn't deal with both the spells and the creatures. It was a very effective deck.
Yeah, triggered abilities are always a nice thing to have. But again, if you're not going heavy on your spells, then these guys aren't necessary to make your deck better.
Yeah. So anyway, we're gonna move into our top 5, and the most of the ones we look at are usually ones that are going to make a big impact, but sometimes in our top 5, we usually have creatures that are just fun to do. And I built a commander deck, and I've used this guy on several occasions, but I've used him in a life gain, red white life gain, and I've also used him in a as a commander for a spell slinger deck, and he still did quite a bit of damage. But the first one I'm going to talk about is a Norin the Weary. He's a very simplistic, very cheap, very small creature, but in the right context, he is just a fun creature to play with. And he's not really the most, well, I don't know what word to use, but he's not really the most impactful creature. But he's just fun, especially when you have the sisters down, which will be my top 5 when I talk about white. But when I had him, I was able to blink him every turn with the sisters out, and I was gaining life like no other. But Norin the Rary is a red for a 2/1, so he gives you a little bit more power than for a 1 mana card. But he has some downsides, but you can use that to your advantage. When a player plays a spell or a creature attacks, remove him from the game, and then at the end of the turn, return him into under its owner's control. Now, again, he's a lot of blink, but let's say that's my turn, and the person is tapped out. I can turn around, or even if they're not, I can turn around and attack with him, make them use their creature, and then I can turn around, play a spell, blink him out, or do damage depending on the situation. And if I blink him out, I don't lose him. And in the process, I'm still doing what I want to do with my spells. And if they don't block him, then I get extra damage in. So he is just a really versatile and really fun creature that is just really fun to use.
Yeah, he's almost impossible to get rid of because once the spell is cast, he's no longer on the field. So another use for this guy is if you have enter the battlefield triggers, things like explore and other effects that do that, he will pull that trigger for you every time, essentially whenever you do anything, whether it's attacking or casting. He's going to give you that enter the battlefield trigger on the end step.
He's just a really fun creature. And of course, the typical feeling that usually comes from Han Solo in Star Wars, I have a bad feeling about this. Alright, so next creature is
Ball Lightning. This guy is 3 red, 6/1, trample and haste. At the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Ball Lightning. I have seen him drop on turn 2, and at that point, the very best your opponent has to block with is probably a 1/1. So he's doing minimum 5 damage if you can get him early. And in the commander format, it's not quite as good because you're limited to 1 per deck. But in the modern or Pioneer, I think he's legal in Pioneer. You put 4 of him in your deck, and that is massive amounts of damage. And because he's trample, you're likely to get some in, even if you're playing him mid to late game.
I know you built a elemental deck, and he was one of the things that really could get a lot of damage in really fast, and he was not a fun creature to play against. So my next one, and I'm going to skip my top 2, but I'm going to go with Torbran. If you're talking red, you're talking about a lot of burn, you're talking about a lot of damage, and Torbran is just one of those fun creatures that really, really expands on that. Thrain of the Red Fell, he is a colorless and 3 red, so he's a 4 mana. He's a dwarf noble, and he's a 2/4. Not really big, but because of his text, you can really add on the damage. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent, and keep in mind that red has a lot of different spells that do different kinds of burn. But whenever you would, if a red source you control will deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So even though it's only 2 damage, that adds up. It adds up, and it adds up. And I mean, it does some massive damage. I mean, if you're already talking about Ball Lightning with a trample, instead of a 5 damage going over, it could be a 7 damage going over. Young Pyromancer does the Gutter Snipe does 1 damage whenever you play, 2 damage whenever you play a spell. Thank you. But with Torbran on play, it would do 4 damage. So you're doubling the amount of damage to a lot of those spells. And we're going to hit some other, on another video, we're going to talk about some of the burn spells that he would also impact. But he's a very, very impactful card when it comes to red.
He's also a lot of fun when you throw down the Goblin Chain Whirler. The Chain Whirler does 1 damage to every creature your opponents control. So with this guy on the field, it would be 3 damage.
And that will do a lot of killing on those decks.
Right.
So we're going to go ahead and go to the next one, which is Rekindling Phoenix.
Rekindling Phoenix is 2 colorless and 2 red, 4/3 with flying. I've liked this card ever since it was printed in Ixalan. Absolutely fell in love with it. When Rekindling Phoenix dies, create a 0/1 red elemental token with, at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice this creature. We're talking about the 0/1 token. And return target card named Rekindling Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. It has haste until end of turn. So, very difficult to get rid of because even after it dies, you still have the 0/1 elemental that can get it back on your upkeep. And when it does come back, your boy has haste. It's really handy, and I've absolutely fallen in love with this guy.
The greatest thing about him is he's almost impossible to use, and if you do get rid of him, you almost have to sacrifice spells. It's almost a 2-for-1 sacrifice of spells, where you got to concentrate something to kill him, and then you got to turn around and kill the token on top of that. A lot of decks that you play against, whether it's Commander or 60 card, it's easy to remove one thing, but when you got to remove 2 things to keep something out of play, that's almost impossible to do a lot of the time.
Yes, it's incredibly difficult to kill, and again, if you're playing Modern or Pioneer, you run 4 of them in your deck, and it's very likely you'll be able to keep replaying them because you won't be able to keep all 4 of the elemental tokens off the field.
When he was in Standard, they were talking about actually banning him because, I mean, he was just so hard to remove. They didn't ban him, but he was so impactful. I mean, if you had him in play and you could get at least 2 or 3 of them down, that was almost always game really fast. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one, and it's kind of a 2-card tie for me, and they kind of go hand in hand. Again, it is a tribal deck that I go with for Commander. I've actually dispatched it, and part of me wishes I didn't, but I was just bored with it because nobody wanted to play against it. But Krenko the Mobb Boss, you're going to see why the other one's included with him, but it's almost like if you have this one, you have to have the other one with it to make it do what you want it to do. But Krenko Mobb Boss is 2 and 2 red. He's legendary, so he can be commander, and for a goblin tribal, you definitely want him as a commander. And you can make him really fast too. You can tap them to create X 1/1 red goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. He's also a 3/3. Now, in red, there's a lot of ways to give your creatures haste, so he can pretty much do it right from the start by the time he comes into play. But yeah, when you're doing tribal with him, and a tribal just means you're doing a bunch of the same type of creatures, which he being a goblin tribal, like I said, and just being able to tap them to create that many goblins is just amazing. But then what really makes this card stand out has to be the conclusion of this card also, which is a 1-mana card, which you can get out really quick. But Skirk Prospector is a 1/1 goblin, and you can sacrifice a goblin, any goblin, to add a red. To have an unlimited number of tokens is just ridiculous. And Krenko, if you are left unchecked, can make you have unlimited number of goblins to sacrifice in all kinds of ways really fast.
Yeah, it's absolutely obnoxious, the Goblin Tribal decks. And yeah, both of those, the Krenko and the Skirk Prospector, belong in any deck that is focused on goblins.
And even if you're not, even if you only have Krenko and you're just using him to do his text, it takes a little bit longer to make it happen. You got to have Skirk with it. I almost guarantee you that with Skirk, I mean, you're just going to have Red to do whatever you want to do with. You know, it's you just can't have one without the other. So to go with that,
My next red creature is Squee the Immortal. 1 colorless, 2 red. Legendary creature goblin. You can cast Squee the Immortal from your graveyard or from exile. This is another guy that is almost impossible to keep out of the game. One, he's only 3 mana to play, but again, you can cast him from the grave or from exile. So even if he's sacrificed and your graveyard gets exiled, he can still come back. Good luck trying to get rid of him. He's not big, but he's obnoxious because he is essentially immortal.
there's not really much I can throw into that. I mean, he's just a beast. I mean, how do you get rid of somebody that you can just sacrifice and attack with, and sacrifice and attack with, and you just can't get rid of it? That's one of the most frustrating things when it comes to Magic, is being able to just return stuff. He was going to be on my top 5 as an honorable mention, but Ned had him, and I let Ned keep it because Squee is just so much fun.
He truly is.
So the next one we're going to get into is going to be going into my, again, back to the dragon type. But I'm going to do, I don't know which one to do first because they both are very, very impactful. I think this guy is toward the bottom of my top 5 just because he's so expensive. But if he gets on the field, it's almost a game over at that point. Drakuseth Maul Flames is 4 and 3 red. Very expensive. But he is flying, and whenever he attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. So not only is he a 7/7, but he's also doing 10 additional damage to 3 different targets. That is a really hard pill to swallow, no matter what you're playing.
Absolutely. And 7/7s are difficult to get rid of anyway, but you add the damage on top of it. It's vicious, absolutely vicious, and flying makes it a little bit harder to block as well.
And like I said, you get him in the game, it's almost exactly game over. And in 60 cards, it is pretty much game over. Unless you have Indestructible, then that's a totally different story, but we're not going to go there.
Or protection from red.
Yeah, again, we're not going to go there. So the next one we're going to go to is Kamal Pit Fighter.
Kamal Pit Fighter is 4 colorless, 2 red, 6/1 with haste, and you may tap Kamal Pit Fighter to do 3 damage to target creature or player. So haste means you can pull that trigger as soon as you cast him. You don't have to wait a turn. You can either attack and do 6 damage, or you can tap him to do 3 damage at something. Either way, it's a good call, and I've always liked it. I use it in a few different decks, but quite useful.
Just having a ping deck is just really fun. And he's definitely a nice addition because instead of 1 damage like most of them are, he's 3 damage, and he can kill off something if you need to sacrifice him. So, as a blocker. So he's a chump blocker, but he's a big, big damage dealing chump blocker. So that's always nice. My last one, I think, is probably my favorite card of all in the red when it comes to creatures, but Terror of the Peaks. The price on it is ridiculous, but what he does is even more ridiculous. He is 3 and 2 red, and if you're playing creature happy decks, it doesn't matter what you're playing. He is a 5/4 flyer, so again, he already has that evasion of flying. But spells your opponents cast at target Terror of the Peaks cost an additional 3 life to cast. So if you target him, he's already gonna do you 3 damage in your favor. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peak deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. If it's a Drakuseth, for example, is a 7/7, that's 7 damage going to your biggest target or to an opponent, which is going to do some serious damage, not including what he does himself.
Yeah, this guy is really cool for all the things you already said. And again, even if you're not specifically playing dragons, he probably should be in your deck because of all the other nasty things he can do for you.
If he's not in your deck, again, the biggest reason is probably because of that price tag of right there. That's just really expensive for a card, but he is definitely worth it. And you want to talk about expensive creatures, this last one is even bigger and better than that one.
Ancient Copper Dragon. 4 colorless, 2 red, 6/5 with flying. When Ancient Copper Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. That is really cool because you can sacrifice treasure tokens for mana. So you bring it with the guy, you roll the d20, you create, I don't know, 6, 8, 12, 15 treasure tokens. How fun is that? And if you're playing a Revel in Riches, it only takes 10 treasure tokens to instantly win the game on your next upkeep.
And with him, he's also a 6/5, so he already has a big body. He's flying. But yeah, just the treasure tokens. I mean, at your worst roll, you're still going to get at least one. So yeah, this guy is a beast in every sense. And he's not legendary, so you can have all 4 in your decks, unless you're talking about Commander. That's a different story. But I mean, on a regular deck, you can have up to 4 of them. And imagine trying to tackle 4 of those bad boys. You're going to have at least 4 treasure tokens, if not tons more.
Yep, it's a really good play, but he's not cheap. If you don't already own one, you're probably not willing to pay the price to buy one.
$70 is a real expensive deck. At that point, you might as well just buy the whole set and get a bunch of other good dragons that came with it. So anyway, this is kind of our top red creatures that you can play with. And decks, they're all good for different reasons. Or in Norin's case, he's just fun and annoying. And Squee is too. And plus, the other thing about Squee is he's also known for saying Squee. But that's a different story. Inside joke. Anyway, please like, share, and subscribe. You know, I would love to get you guys' feedback on what kind of creatures you guys enjoy playing. What are some red impactful creatures that you guys love playing in Commander? 60 card, modern, standard, vintage. What are some of the funnest creatures you guys consider that's not on this list? We would love to know.
Yeah, give us your feedback. Let us know your opinions on these things because this isn't just about us. It's also about the Magic community as a whole.
So all we're going to ask is that you guys like, share, subscribe, give us a thumbs up. Just a simple thumbs up. That's a big thumb in your face, in my face, somebody's face. But yeah, we're just here to just share some of our joys of the passion of the game. You guys be blessed, and we'll catch you on the next one.